Welcome to the Cabinet of Science and Fiction.
Great to be here.
Today, we're diving deep into a really mind-bending idea, one championed for years by Graham Hancock.
Ah, yes, the lost civilization hypothesis.
Exactly. The possibility that there was a sophisticated civilization flourishing way back during the last ice age. A civilization whose story has been, well, largely lost to time.
It's a fascinating and definitely controversial starting point.
It really is. What if the history we think we know, the neat timeline, is only part of the picture? Let's explore the clues, the mysteries, and I guess the sheer audacity of this hypothesis.
Sounds good, because when you look at the standard timeline of our own species, Homo sapiens, well, there's a puzzle right there.
What do you mean?
Well, anatomically, modern humans, people like us, have been around for a very long time, hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah.
We see evidence of increasing cognitive abilities, tool use, art. But then, the things we typically associate with civilization, large settlements, agriculture, monumental architecture, they seem to burst onto the scene relatively recently, mostly within the last 10, maybe 12,000 years.
Right, so there's this huge gap, hundreds of thousands of years of supposedly just small hunter-gatherer bands, and then bam! Suddenly we've got cities and farming popping up almost simultaneously in different parts of the world.
Precisely. That's the puzzle. Why the long delay? Hancock's perspective challenges that assumption of a delay.
He suggests maybe things were happening earlier, sophisticated things.
Yes, perhaps activities that just haven't been fully uncovered or maybe haven't left the kinds of traces that traditional archaeology readily finds.
Like what kind of traces are we talking about?
Well, archaeology heavily relies on durable materials, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Stone tools, pottery, building foundations made of stone or brick.
Sure, things that last.
But what if an earlier culture relied more on, say, wood? Or sophisticated textiles, or perhaps knowledge systems passed down orally through stories and traditions. Those things leave a much fainter footprint, if any at all.
That makes sense. And it's true, we only dig up a tiny fraction of potential sites, don't we?
Incredibly tiny fraction.
Yeah.
Estimates vary, but it's often cited as maybe 1 to 5% of known sites actually being excavated. And that doesn't even count the sites we haven't found yet.
So vast areas remain unexplored. Think about jungles, deserts.
Or under the oceans. We'll probably get to that later, the sea level changes.
Right. Okay, so the absence of evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence. There could be things we just haven't found or can't easily see.
That's a key part of the thinking. And then there's another layer Hancock points to, these intriguing similarities across ancient cultures.
The common threads. Myths, symbols, even spiritual ideas that seem to echo each other, even when cultures are separated by huge distances in time.
Exactly. It's quite striking when you start looking. Take the idea of the Milky Way as a sort of path of souls.
The cosmic river for the afterlife journey.
Yes, precisely that image. You find variations of it in ancient Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in India, and across the Americas. Different cultures, different continents, different times, yet this specific association of the soul's journey with that band of stars keeps reappearing.
That is specific. Is it just coincidence? Everyone sees the Milky Way, maybe they independently came up with similar ideas.
That's the conventional explanation, of course. Independent invention based on universal human experiences or observations of the night sky.
But Hancock suggests something else.
He proposes that these shared motifs might be too specific, too widespread to be purely coincidental. Could they point towards a common inheritance, a legacy from a much older, shared source culture?
A lost parent civilization, essentially, whose ideas were scattered.
That's the implication. He argues we need a history of ideas alongside the traditional archaeological history of things. We need to trace how these concepts might have been transmitted.
Okay, so maybe migrations, maybe trade routes carrying ideas further back than we think?
Possibly. Or perhaps survivors from a lost civilization, spreading out and influencing the developing cultures they encountered. It forces us to take myths and traditions more seriously, not just as fanciful stories, but as potential carriers of ancient knowledge or memory.
It's a different way of reading the past. Not just artifacts, but the stories, too. Now, another big piece of this puzzle involves astronomy. Ancient astronomy.
Yes, the idea that ancient cultures might have possessed a much deeper understanding of the cosmos than we typically credit them with, particularly concerning long-term celestial cycles.
You're talking about the precession of the equinoxes. Sounds complex.
It is a bit technical, but the basic concept isn't too hard. Imagine the Earth spinning like a top. As it spins on its axis daily, that axis itself performs a very slow wobble, like a gyroscope winding down.
Okay, a wobble.
This wobble is called precession. And over a very long cycle, about 26,000 years, it causes the apparent position of the stars to shift. Crucially, it changes which constellation the sun appears to rise in on the morning of the spring equinox.
Ah, the astrological ages. Like, we're currently in the age of Pisces, moving towards Aquarius.
Exactly that. Those ages are defined by which constellation the sun is in during the spring equinox due to precession. It's a very, very slow drift.
How slow?
Extremely slow. The shift is only about 1 degree every 72 years.
Wow. So in a whole human lifetime, the stars would barely seem to move against the sunrise on that specific day.
Pretty much. Maybe about the width of your finger held at arm's length against the horizon. It's incredibly subtle.
So how could anyone even notice it, let alone track it?
That's the key question. To recognize and measure precession requires meticulous, long-term observation passed down across many generations. It implies a stable society, sophisticated record-keeping, and a deep focus on the heavens.
And yet, Hancock suggests some ancient cultures did know about it, much earlier than mainstream science believes.
He points to certain alignments in symbolism. For example, if you wind the precessional clock back about 12,500 years to roughly 10,500 BC.
Which is around the end of the last ice age?
Correct. At that time, the sun on the spring equinox was rising in the constellation of Leo, the lion.
Leo the lion. Okay, that immediately makes me think of the Sphinx.
Precisely. That connection is central to the Giza arguments we'll likely discuss. The suggestion is that a lost civilization understood precession and encoded this knowledge, perhaps marking significant epochs like the Age of Leo, into their monuments and myths.
Encoding messages across millennia using the language of the stars. That's a profound idea. It implies a very long-term perspective.
It really does. A connection to cosmic cycles far beyond the everyday.
Okay, so we have this potential for earlier sophistication, shared myths, maybe advanced astronomy. But then something happens, something big. Let's talk about the Younger Dryas.
The Younger Dryas. This is a critical piece of the puzzle. It was a period starting around 12,800 years ago when the climate suddenly plunged back into near glacial conditions.
So the world was warming up after the Ice Age, glaciers were melting, and then wham! Back into the freezer.
Essentially, yes. Yep. It interrupted the warming trend for about 1,200 years. It wasn't just a minor dip. It was a major global climate disruption, rapid, severe cooling.
That must have been catastrophic for life on Earth, including humans.
Absolutely devastating. And the evidence suggests it wasn't a slow, gradual shift. There are strong indications of rapid, cataclysmic events associated with its onset and end.
Like what kind of events?
Geologically, we see evidence for sudden, rapid sea level rise, meltwater pulses flooding coastal areas around the start and end of the Younger Dryas. Imagine huge areas of land just disappearing under the waves relatively quickly.
That sounds like the basis for a global flood story.
Doesn't it? Hancock argues that the near-universal presence of flood myths in cultures across the globe isn't just coincidence, but likely a deeply ingrained collective memory of the massive coastal inundations during this period.
Okay, so massive climate change, sea level rise. What caused it? Hancock and others point to something pretty dramatic, right? The impact hypothesis.
Yes, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. This proposes that the abrupt climate shift, the extinctions, the wildfires, were triggered by Earth encountering a swarm of cometary fragments.
Like cosmic impacts hitting the Earth.
Potentially multiple impacts, or perhaps more likely, numerous large airburst objects exploding in the atmosphere with tremendous force. The likely culprit identified is the Taurid meteor stream.
The Taurids? Aren't those associated with some modern meteor showers? And the Tunguska event?
Exactly. The Tunguska event in Siberia in 1908, which flattened hundreds of square miles of forest, is thought to have been an airburst from an object maybe 1,500 meters across, likely from the Taurid complex. The hypothesis suggests that around 12,800 years ago, Earth passed through a much denser, more dangerous cloud of debris from a disintegrating giant comet within that stream.
A sort of cosmic minefield. What's the evidence for this bombardment?
Across the globe, researchers have found a distinct geological layer dating precisely to the Younger Dryas onset, around 12,800 years ago. It's called the Younger Dryas boundary, or YDB layer.
And what's in this layer?
A cocktail of impact proxies. Things like high levels of soot, indicating continent-scale wildfires. Microscopic diamonds, called nanodiamonds, formed under extreme pressure. Shocked quartz grains, fractured by high-velocity impact. Tiny magnetic spherules, molten materials splashed from impacts or airbursts, elevated platinum group metals in some areas.
Wow, so it's like the planet got dusted with the debris from massive explosions. Is this similar to the evidence for the dinosaur extinction impact?
Very similar logic. Remember, the Chicxulub crater wasn't found immediately. First came the discovery of the global iridium layer, an impact marker. Proponents argue the YDB layer provides analogous widespread evidence for cosmic impacts, even if we haven't yet found one single massive crater definitively tied to the onset of the Younger Dryas. There might have been multiple smaller impacts or airbursts over land and ice sheets.
And this cosmic event could explain the sudden cooling, the megafauna extinctions.
Yes, the theory posits the impacts kicked up massive amounts of dust and smoke, blocking sunlight, causing rapid cooling. The shock waves, wildfires, and potentially associated flooding could have wiped out many large animal species, the mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats.
And human populations, like the Clovis people in North America, they disappear right around this time.
The timing is strikingly coincident. The Clovis culture vanishes from the archaeological record almost exactly when the Younger Dryas begins and the YDB layer is deposited. It suggests a major disruption, if not devastation, of human populations too.
Is there direct evidence of settlements being hit?
One really compelling site is Abu Huraira in Syria. It was an early settlement right near Göbekli Tepe, actually. Archaeological layers there show the village was abruptly destroyed around 12,800 years ago.
How was it destroyed?
Evidence points to intense heat, essentially vitrifying building materials, turning mud brick into glass-like substances. And guess what they found in that destruction layer?
Let me guess. The Younger Dryas boundary impact proxies.
Bingo. Nanodiamonds, melt glass, the whole suite. It looks very much like the settlement was directly hit or affected by an airburst event at the exact time the Younger Dryas kicked off.
That's chillingly specific. An entire town incinerated. Now, are there other theories for the Younger Dryas?
Oh, absolutely. It's still debated. Other theories involve massive freshwater discharge from melting North American ice sheets, disrupting ocean currents, like the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, or perhaps intense solar outbursts or unusual volcanic activity.
So the cause isn't definitively settled?
Not universally agreed upon, no. But the key point for Hancock's broader argument is the Younger Dryas itself, the undeniable reality of a global cataclysmic period, regardless of the precise trigger, a period of immense destruction and upheaval that reset the course of life on Earth.
A reset, and maybe an opportunity or a necessity for survivors to rebuild or share knowledge.
That's exactly where the thinking leads, especially when you look at what emerges right after the Younger Dryas ends, around 11,600 years ago.
And that brings us to Göbekli Tepe, doesn't it? In Turkey.
Yes, Göbekli Tepe. This site is, frankly, revolutionary. Its oldest layers date back to about 9600 BC, precisely when the Younger Dryas cold period snapped back to warmer conditions.
And it's, what, a temple complex?
It appears to be. It consists of multiple large circular enclosures, semi-subterranean, defined by massive T-shaped pillars of limestone, some weighing many tons.
T-shaped pillars? Why T-shaped?
That's one of the mysteries. They seem anthropomorphic, like stylized humans, but highly abstract. Many are intricately carved with reliefs of animals, foxes, boars, snakes, birds, spiders, very sophisticated artwork.
And this makes it the oldest known megalithic site. Older than Stonehenge or the pyramids by millennia.
By thousands of years. Yeah. Stonehenge is maybe 5,000 years old in its main phases. The oldest parts of Göbekli Tepe are pushing 11,600 years old.
Built by whom? This is the kicker.
Right. This is what completely overturns the standard model. Yeah. All the evidence suggests Göbekli Tepe was built by people who were still essentially hunter-gatherers.
Hunter-gatherers built a massive, complex stone temple complex before agriculture.
Yes. The conventional wisdom was always that you needed agriculture first, the food surplus, the settled populations, the labor specialization before you could undertake monumental construction projects like this. Göbekli Tepe flips that script entirely.
So they organized this huge labor force, quarried and moved massive stones, did intricate carving, all before they widely adopted farming.
It seems so. Large-scale agriculture appears in that region later, around the time Göbekli Tepe was eventually deliberately buried.
They buried it on purpose.
Yes, starting around 8000 BC, the enclosures were intentionally backfilled with earth and debris over centuries, another huge mystery. Why build something so incredible and then bury it?
Were they hiding it, protecting it, marking an end of an era? So many questions. And it wasn't just Göbekli Tepe itself, was it? There are related sites.
Correct. Ongoing surveys are revealing a whole network of contemporary sites in the surrounding region, the Tastepler, or Stone Hills. Sites like Karahan Tepe show similar features. T-pillars, circular enclosures, animal carvings. It looks like Göbekli Tepe wasn't an isolated anomaly, but perhaps the central or maybe the final expression of a much wider, older cultural complex we're only just beginning to understand.
A whole Stone Hills civilization existing at the dawn of the Holocene, right after the Younger Dryas.
Wow. Okay, let's travel southwest to another place full of ancient mysteries, Egypt, the Giza Plateau.
Giza, the pyramids, the Sphinx. Instantly recognizable, but maybe not as well understood as we think.
Conventional Egyptology dates the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx to the Old Kingdom around 2500 BC. But Hancock, following work by people like John Anthony West and Robert Schoch, questions that dating, particularly for the Sphinx.
Yes, the Sphinx erosion argument. This is based on geology, not just archaeology. Robert Schoch, a geologist, examined the erosion patterns on the body of the Sphinx and, crucially, on the walls of the limestone enclosure ditch it sits in. And he concluded it wasn't just wind and sand erosion, which you'd expect in a desert.
Exactly. He argued the deep vertical fissures and undulating, rounded profiles of the erosion is highly characteristic of precipitation-based weathering, water runoff over long periods.
Rain in Egypt. Enough rain to heavily erode limestone.
Yes, but not rain in the Old Kingdom period, when the climate was already hyper-arid, much like today. Schoch argues these patterns point to a time when the Sahara was much wetter, receiving significantly more rainfall.
And when was that?
The last extended wet period in that region ended thousands of years before the time of Khafre, the pharaoh usually credited with building the Sphinx. It potentially pushes the date for the carving of the original form of the Sphinx back towards that same window around the end of the Ice Age, maybe 12,000 years ago or even earlier.
Back to the Younger Dryas era again, so the Sphinx could be vastly older than the pyramids it guards.
That's the controversial suggestion, that the Sphinx might predate the pyramids by millennia, and maybe the dynastic Egyptians simply recarved the head in their own time on a much older lion body.
And what about the pyramids? Do they fit into this alternative timeline?
Here, the argument shifts more towards astronomy. Building on the work of Robert Bauval, Hancock emphasizes the alignment of the three Great Pyramids.
They line with Orion's belt, right?
Yes, they mimic the layout and relative brightness of the three stars of Orion's belt. But Bauval noted that due to precession, that slow wobble of the Earth's axis, the alignment wasn't perfect in 2500 BC.
When was it perfect? Or most precise?
The simulation showed the best fit. The lowest point of Orion's belt on the meridian at the moment of the spring equinox sunrise occurred around 10,500 BC.
10,500 BC, there's that date again. The same time the Sphinx, if the erosion argument holds, would align with its celestial counterpart on the horizon, the constellation Leo.
Precisely. You have the Sphinx, a lion gazing due east, where its own constellation, Leo, would have housed the sun on the spring equinox around 10,500 BC, while the pyramids simultaneously mirror Orion's belt in the sky at its lowest point. It seems like an intentional marking of that specific epoch, using architectural and astronomical language.
So the idea isn't necessarily that the pyramids we see today were fully built in 10,500 BC, but that the site was laid out then, or that the dynastic Egyptians built on something much older.
That's a more nuanced interpretation some propose. Perhaps the Giza complex represents a vast project of renovation and memorialization by the dynastic Egyptians, consciously aligning their monuments with a pattern established in a much earlier time, a time they perhaps revered as a golden age. Maybe they inherited the site or even plans.
Are there other physical clues at Giza suggesting older structures?
Some point to the Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple near the Sphinx. They're built with enormous megalithic limestone core blocks, much larger and stylistically different from typical Old Kingdom construction. The Valley Temple, for instance, has these huge core blocks that show significant erosion before they were later faced with granite in dynastic times.
So evidence of earlier phases of building, potentially. And didn't the ancient Egyptians themselves talk about a much older history?
They certainly did. Their concept of Zep Tepi, the first time, refers to a remote epoch, a golden age when gods ruled on Earth, believed to predate the pharaohs by millennia. Their king lists, like the Turin Papyrus or Manetho's history, record dynasties of gods and demigods ruling for tens of thousands of years before the first human pharaohs.
Mainstream Egyptology usually dismisses those as purely mythological.
Generally, yes. But Hancock suggests we should perhaps consider if they represent a distorted folk memory of a very real, very remote, high civilization. They also had traditions of secret societies, like the followers of Horus or the souls of Pe and Nekhen, who were said to be guardians of ancient wisdom passed down from the time of the gods.
Guardians of knowledge from Zep Tepi, maybe? Knowledge from before the cataclysm?
That's the tantalizing possibility.
Yeah.
Which leads to the question, How could complex knowledge actually survive such a long time, especially through periods of chaos like the Younger Dryas?
Right. How do you transmit detailed astronomical data or building plans across thousands of years, maybe without widespread writing initially?
This is where the power of narrative and story comes in. There's that famous Egyptian myth about the god Thoth inventing writing and offering it to the pharaoh Thomas.
And the pharaoh wasn't impressed.
He was wary. He worried that writing would become a crutch, that people would rely on external symbols and neglect the cultivation of their own memory. He feared true wisdom would be lost.
That's fascinating. So oral tradition might be more robust than we think.
It can be incredibly robust. Humans are hardwired for stories. Information encoded in a compelling narrative, a myth, an epic poem, a religious text, can be transmitted with high fidelity across generations, even if the later storytellers don't fully grasp the original technical or historical meaning embedded within it.
The story itself preserves the data, almost like a coded message.
Exactly. The narrative structure, the memorable characters, the symbolism, they act as vehicles for the information. Hancock argues we should treat these widespread ancient myths, especially those dealing with cataclysms, astronomy, and civilizing heroes, as potentially serious repositories of ancestral knowledge.
So the stories of gods teaching astronomy or agriculture might be more than just myths. Okay, if we entertain this idea of a lost Ice Age civilization, where was it? We can't just point to Giza or Göbekli Tepe as its origin, can we? They seem more like potential legacies or restart points.
That's a crucial question. Where would such a civilization likely have been based during the Ice Age, say 15,000 or 20,000 years ago? Hancock argues probably not in northern Europe or North America, which were largely under thick ice sheets.
So where was habitable and potentially conducive to development?
We need to look at the gaps in our knowledge and areas that were environmentally different back then. One prime candidate is the Sahara Desert.
Which wasn't a desert then.
No, during much of the Ice Age and the period immediately following, it was well-watered savanna with rivers and lakes, potentially a very favorable environment. Archaeology there is difficult due to the sand cover now.
What about other areas? The Amazon.
The Amazon rainforest is another huge area where archaeology is incredibly challenging due to the dense vegetation and soil conditions.
Yeah.
There's growing evidence of complex societies there in the past, possibly much older than previously thought.
But the biggest lost world candidate might be underwater, right? Due to sea level rise.
Absolutely. This is perhaps the most compelling location. At the peak of the last ice age, around 20,000 years ago, sea levels were about 400 feet, or 120 meters, lower than today.
400 feet, that's enormous. That would expose huge areas of land that are now submerged.
Vast areas. The continental shelves around the world's landmasses were exposed, creating coastal plains, river valleys, archipelagos that simply don't exist anymore. Think about places like Sundaland in Southeast Asia, a whole subcontinent now mostly underwater. Or the Persian Gulf, which was largely a dry river valley, large parts of the North Sea, the coast of the Americas.
So prime real estate for any civilization, especially one potentially focused on maritime activity, would now be deep underwater.
Exactly. If such a civilization existed and favored coastal locations, as many societies do, its heartlands could be entirely submerged, making discovery incredibly difficult. Hancock posits perhaps a global seafaring culture, with outposts in various favorable locations, many of which were lost to the rising waters, particularly during the rapid meltwater pulses associated with the Younger Dryas.
A civilization Atlantis-style, swallowed by the sea. It also explains why maybe they didn't leave obvious traces inland.
It could. Perhaps they were primarily coastal or island-based. Maybe they didn't heavily interfere with inland hunter-gatherer groups until the cataclysm forced survivors to seek refuge, or perhaps share their knowledge to help restart civilization among the traumatized remnants of the old world.
So the survivors became the civilizing heroes found in myths worldwide.
That's one way to interpret the hypothesis, yes. It attempts to tie together the geological evidence, the archaeological anomalies, and the mythological themes into one coherent, albeit speculative, narrative.
Okay, one final point. When we say advanced civilization, what does that really mean in this context? Are we talking about technology like ours?
Not necessarily. Hancock is usually careful to clarify this. Advanced doesn't automatically mean computers and spacecraft. It refers more to specific capabilities that seem out of place for the conventional timeline, such as highly sophisticated astronomical knowledge, like understanding precession, the ability to undertake precise, large-scale megalithic construction, perhaps advanced agricultural techniques, and critically, global navigation.
Navigation, like mapping the world.
Yes. One intriguing piece of evidence often cited are the Portolano charts, medieval maps showing coastlines, particularly the Mediterranean, with astonishing accuracy, far exceeding the known navigational capabilities of that time.
Where did the information for those maps come from?
That's the mystery. Some researchers, including Hancock, suggest they might be copies of copies, based on much older source maps originating from a lost civilization that had accurately mapped parts of the world long before the Age of Exploration. Maps perhaps preserved in places like the Library of Alexandria or Constantinople, then rediscovered. The ability to accurately determine longitude in particular was a huge challenge until the 18th century, yet some features on these maps seem to imply that knowledge existed far earlier.
So advanced in terms of knowledge, geographical, astronomical, engineering, rather than necessarily gadgets.
Precisely. A different kind of advancement, perhaps more focused on understanding the Earth and the cosmos, and sustainable living within that framework, rather than industrial technology as we know it.
It paints a very different picture of the deep past.
It certainly does. These enduring mysteries, the anomalies like Göbekli Tepe and the potential age of the Sphinx, coupled with the very real cataclysm of the Younger Dryas. They offer a compelling reason to at least consider the hypothesis of a lost chapter in the human story.
It forces us to think about the implications, doesn't it? What if there was a global catastrophe within human memory? What if ancient cultures really did encode profound knowledge in their myths and monuments?
It prompts a fundamental question. What other stories from our past, currently dismissed as mere legends, might hold surprising truths just waiting for us to decipher them?
A question to ponder. This has been a fascinating deep dive.
Indeed. Lots to think about.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Until next episode.